I recently watched the talk that Venerable Losam um, Gendin posted for Shantideva Center. It was entitled Monks and Nuns in Western Buddhism, What is Their Role? And in that talk, he emphasized that an important part of our practice as monastics is to offer service to our community. He gave a lot of different points about why it's important to live in a community, and that's a very big one. And I also mentioning this point because it goes into some other stuff that I'm going to talk about, and because I recognize this, I see it. Um, I see how being concerned for the community, the needs of the community, really help us to overcome our preoccupation with ourself and how important of a practice that is. Um, a few years ago, we were having some discussions with some of the elder bhikshunis in Taiwan on Zoom on our screen here. And several of them mentioned, and this was in the context of training, how you train people during an ordination. And several of them mentioned the main thing when you're training in a monastery is to train people to overcome their idea of this self, preoccupation, self-centeredness, this wrong view of the self, as being independent. Um, so it helps us to reduce our self-centeredness. It also helps us to develop consideration for others, personal integrity, honesty, patience, and so forth. But only if we are doing the inner work. Otherwise, you can be in a rock tumbler and you're not doing well if you're not doing the inner work. But if we are doing the inner work, trying to transform our focus from ourselves to others, to our community, then we can really serve the community with a lot of joy. And I would say not only is the serving the community an important part of our practice, but our inner personal practice is an important part of what we offer our community. It changes our behavior. It's also what we offer people in general. Even if people don't live in a monastery, when they're doing inner work, they become an example for others. And it's just a lot more intense in a community. Um, I've been doing because it shows in our behavior when we're doing the inner work and how we treat others, how we treat community property, how we speak and how we act, and how we take responsibility for our messes. And when I say messes, it could be the messes that we leave around physically. It can be the difficulties that we cause in trying to get along with others in the community. And just as when we dealing with our physical messes, we have to be aware of our actions. We have to recognize the mess we made. And then we have to be able to take responsibility for it. It involves a certain awareness and a certain consideration for others and personal integrity. And it's the same with the messes from unskillful interactions with others. We have to become aware of what we're doing. We have to be able to take responsibility to clean up our messes, and to involves a lot of the same mental factors of personal integrity, honesty, patience, and consideration for others. And so I've been facilitating safe chorus that Safe Course 11 that is involved with purification. It's the Vajrasattva purification specifically, but there's a lot of the factors of purification that will be in any practice that's a purification practice. And recently we were going over the difficulties with omitting our mistakes. Because when we do purification practices, we have to admit our mistakes to ourselves, and we admit them and confess them before Vajrasattva or whatever practice we're doing, maybe before the 35 Buddhas. But also, we covered omitting mistakes and apologizing to others, those we've harmed. And it's quite common that people have difficulty with this. And I might find it easier to apologize and admit a mistake to to one person and not to another, or to one group of people and not another, depending on what I might consider, what kind of expectations I have about their response. And also, we're conditioned beings, and we have previous experiences with how people responded when we've apologized. And so some people may have more problems apologizing than others, depending on the environment that they grew up in and what kind of reactions they saw people give when there was apologies. So it can take a lot of courage to admit one's mistakes. And this can even be the case with admitting one's mistakes to oneself, especially if we haven't learned to differentiate guilt and regret. So guilt is a wrong view. Guilt is a wrong view, which is non-virtuous. It's a view that sees oneself as flawed or worthless, lousy because of an action one has done. Where regret is a mind, actually there's a definition for regret, regret is a mind that regards an action that we've done and says, this is something I don't want to do again. And that's it. It's not beating oneself up. It's an mental state that says, that recognizes I went off course and I want to be back on course. This is when it's virtuous. It's regret is indeterminate, depending on if you're regretting an appropriate action or an inappropriate action. Then it can be virtuous or non-virtuous. But virtuous regret just sees that it's off course and wants to go back on course. And just intellectually understanding this is helpful, but it's not enough, especially if we've been habituated to guilt in the past. We need to understand what these are, contemplate the differences, and learn to recognize those differences in our own mind stream. And when we've done this kind of work, then we can confess to ourselves. We can look at our own mistakes with honesty in a way that guilt has been an obstacle to doing or a hindrance. But regarding apologizing to other people, when we apologize for something we've done and admit our mistakes, we set a good example. And I can think of several people around here that I would say are good examples in that way. We're not perfect, but we make messes, and then they go to the people that they've had problems with and say, oh, I'm sorry, I was in a bad mood or whatever. And when I see that, I don't feel I don't have a negative view of that person. I see them as having a lot of courage. I see them as showing their personal integrity and honesty and consideration for others. It's funny in a way that when I see someone apologize or admit their mistakes, I see these virtuous things. I see strength. And yet, when I have to be in that situation, I don't feel so strong about it. I might have fear about that. Also, when someone else apologizes to us, so when we do apologize, we set a good example. We set, and in the context of a monastic situation, we set a certain tone and a certain culture that's that makes it different, because we're in a different container than just in the broader society. Not that it's not important elsewhere. It does. It makes when people apologize for the mistakes and own up to them, in any situation, it has a good effect. It even if it's a small ripple in a big pool. But here in a monastic situation, with the people we live around and work around all the time, it helps to set a certain culture of what we're doing and what behavior is possible, especially if the others can see that as good behavior. And so then we end up with our personal growth helping to feed the growth of many of the beings in the community. And also, when other people apologize or admit their mistakes, and we respond with kindness and gently accept their apology without being rude or anything, then we also set a certain kind of culture. We make it easier for people to be able to respond to respond to situations in a virtuous way, to respond to their mistakes by omitting them, and if we're kind and respectful when they do so. And it might be that somebody has had a lot of experience of that's different than that, and so it may take a while for that kind of for them to feel comfortable with that. But we create a situation of trust, where someone trusts that they can admit their mistakes and be treated respectfully and not belittled. Yeah, and in the beginning of this talk, I was talking about the inner practice being part of the offering to our community. But it's also important for all people, for sure. I hear people talk about how they are learning to admit mistakes in their workplace or in their home with their family, and it makes a big difference, because those are communities too, and they're setting an example, and we learn so much by examples. You can hear about, I use generosity as an example for how we learn from examples. I can hear about giving a lot, but when I see somebody actually do it, or I hear an account of it actually happening, then I understand it. Then I'm inspired by it. And I've had good examples here of people learning to own up to their own mistakes honestly. And so basically what I wanted to say here, and that's just one example also of how our inner practice can be an offering. Also, when things don't go as planned and we're calm and don't make a mountain out of a molehill, or turn an ant into an elephant, as some people say. We're doing that same thing. We're behaving in a way that's reflecting our inner practice, that is setting a good example, a good tone, and a good culture for us all to learn in. So these are the things I've been thinking about, and hopefully we can all we can recognize that our inner practice makes a difference in the world. And not everybody's going to respond positively when you act virtuously, but we're setting seeds. And so there's this very wonderful balance of how our own practice is partially working for our community rather than focusing too much on just ourselves, but also how when we take responsibility for what is ours, we help to benefit the community. And that's part of the practice part of the offering we give to our community and the world.